And now it's time for us to discuss more of these headlines and simple keywords with Adam joining us via Zoom. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Lena. Happy hump day.
Halfway through, not so shabby.
Not so shabby. It's been a bit wet, but it's drying up this morning. A bit overcast still, though.
And it's going to be scorching hot in the afternoon. Looking forward to it.
Yay. I'm going to be staying indoors, all windows and doors closed, air conditioner on full.
I think staying safe is something that needs to be highlighted each summer, and you've just laid out the perfect plan. Thanks.
With an ice cream in my hand as well.
Yum. All right, let's jump into our keyword news portion of the day. We're going to try to clarify some major headlines, and this is our first pick of the day.
IAEA report.
So the expected, perhaps, IAEA report deeming nuclear wastewater to be safe. So the International Atomic Energy Agency has given the green light to Japan's planned discharge of wastewater from Fukushima. What's the latest?
Yeah, so it said in its report that the discharge of treated water was basically in line with relevant international safety standards. It added that the release won't really have much of a radiological impact on people or the environment. And the announcement is actually not that different from the agency's previous stance. Now, the IAEA stressed that its team would have a continued presence at that plant in Fukushima during and after the planned discharges. So it's basically saying that's going to be keeping an eye on all the process. Now, at a joint press conference with the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, the Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi vowed to carefully relay the IAEA's determinations to the international community with transparency based on scientific evidence. That's, of course, because a lot of neighboring countries are still expressing concern over the planned release, including here in Korea. And speaking of Korea, Grossi is actually expected to visit Seoul on Friday to meet officials here. He emphasized that he will listen to and address the opinions and concerns surfacing from other countries. Now, the visit itself is actually facing some fierce protests from the opposition party, the Democratic Party, which is accusing the IAEA of being biased in favor of Japan. And this has kind of sparked a kind of political heated debate. The ruling People Power Party said that DP's rejection of the IAEA's yet to be announced verdict on Japan's plan is medieval and backwards, because it's basically saying that it's ignoring the scientific grounds of which the IAEA has made its announcements and basically just making assessments on hunches, basically. And he said the ruling party and the government would dissect the IAEA assessment once it is released to come up with measures to reassure the South Korean public of the plan's safety. Now, the South Korean government is in the final stage of its own scientific analysis of the discharge plan. That's based on the kind of verdicts and assessments made by the Korean inspection team to Fukushima, as well as breaking down that IAEA assessment as well.
And of course, understanding that there is public fear and perhaps even that same shared distrust prompted sure by the DP, but it's shared by part of the public. South Korea's Nuclear Safety Commission was put together. They'll make its stance on the IAEA conclusions during its regular briefing today. That's not the end of it. They promised they would have regular briefings so that they'll address some of those public concerns, right? It's certainly not the end of it, but we know the IAEA report this morning. All right, let's move on to our second keyword of the day.
Growth outlook cut.
So the Korean government has cut its economic growth projection for the nation to 1.4% from 1.6%. This comes as exports struggle to rebound, yet the inflationary pressure may be lifting just a little bit out of the woods. That's a big question.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit optimistic to have all economic indices and data kind of get better all in one go. So I think
I don't think that's ever happened.
That's, of course, a very unrealistic view on things. But of course, things are slowly, bit by bit, improving. As you say, starting off with inflation, it's starting to kind of stabilize somewhat. But of course, exports are still struggling. And that's why there's a bit of a delay on any hopes of an economic rebound. rebound. That's why the GDP growth forecast was cut from the previous 1.6% to 1.4. Now, the finance ministry initially suggested that the Korean economy would see a rebound in mid 2023. We are at that point now, but nothing too significant at the moment. But the new forecast has dialed it back to kind of a slow recovery in the second half, followed by more growth next year. So again, and next year is kind of the time frame in which people are seeming to be optimistic. In detail, the government expects the Korean economy to grow 1.8% on year in the second half, eventually reaching 2.4% growth in 2024. In the first 6 months of this year, the economy actually edged up 0.9%. So just ever so slightly kind of picking things up. Now, furthermore, the ministry suggested a 3.3% consumer price inflation rate for this year, pulling down the previous projection of by 0.2 percentage points. So again, nothing too significant, but just a very slight decrease in inflationary pressure. Excuse me. The country's consumer price growth rose 2.7% last month from a year earlier as well. This marked the first time for the figure to actually fall below 3% since September 2021. And Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho said it is notable that the government has been operating sound fiscal management while normalizing the property market by lifting punitive tax policies and regulations. He added that Korea's economy is expected to show more clear signs of recovery down the road, but he did note that uncertainties nevertheless will linger amid geopolitical risks, such as the war between Russia and Ukraine and the US-China trade tensions as well.
Perhaps there are many moving parts to consider, but I just want to point out to something that our expert yesterday shared, Professor Yang Jun-suk. I know you're familiar with him. He said, were we ever satisfied with the state of the economy in the history of our civilization? No.
It's always a matter about, it's always a matter about, is it better than where we are now, or is it worse? It's always a kind of subjective and comparative thing. The
a
economy
relative thing too.
We're never going to be satisfied unless we become super rich at one point, I guess.
So and even then, I think they have their own set of problems. I wouldn't know, but I assume. Exactly. But a point I just want to make is that that's why I think the economy section needs to be taken apart, and those numbers need to be carefully examined and not just misled to different parts or just false hopes or optimism, as we said at the top of this keyword. Let's move on to our third keyword of the day.
Minimum wage.
So talks between labor and management on next year's minimum wage have ended without an agreement again, despite revised proposals from both sides. But this is widely expected, and it's almost regular that tug of war continues for weeks on end before they not so willingly reach an agreement. Tell us more.
Yeah, there's always been a kind of a tense battle between the labor and management whenever these minimum wage talks happen. It's not the first time that such kind of slow progress is made. It happens pretty much every year when such talks are held. And this time round, of course, again, they only confirmed their differences without much progress. The proposed minimum wage levels and the revised proposals were actually not significantly different from the initial demands. So it'll take more time, of course, to narrow the gap between the two sides, if they do narrow that gap, that is. Now, during the meeting, Labour requested an hourly rate wage of 12,131. That's 26% higher than the current minimum wage. The management side proposed an hourly wage of 9,650. That's a 0.3% increase from the current minimum wage. Now, the Minimum Wage Commission requested both Labour and management to submit a second revised proposal before the next meeting tomorrow, in fact, to try and find common ground. It is important to note that the deadline for the minimum wage review has actually passed, but the minimum wage bill needs to be submitted to the Labour Minister by mid-July, so there's still a bit of time, not much though. The minister will then confirm and announce the minimum wage by August 5th. So Whether both sides will be able to hammer out a deal before that remains to be seen. But if they cannot reach an agreement, the minimum wage level might be determined within a specific range proposed by the Commission, which basically is a kind of, well, not so neutral, but it will ultimately have the final decision if both sides are unable to make a decision. But if we look at the revised proposals, there's obviously a huge gap between what they want. So whether they're able to meet in the middle, of course, remains to be seen. Previous interventions by the Commission have, of course, been made because no agreements have been kind of conjured out between both sides. So we'll have to see, at least from tomorrow's meeting as well, to see how things go.
About a 2,500 gap between the two sides offers. We'll leave it there for now. We'll pick things up tomorrow, same time. All right, let's move on to our fourth keyword of the day.
Korea-China talks.
So senior officials from Korea and China held an unexpected meeting in Beijing amid tensions over issues like the controversial remarks made by the Chinese ambassador to Seoul. So what's the latest?
Yeah, so relations between Korea and China, they've kind of been deteriorating over time, ever since the Yoon administration has kind of been leaning diplomatically more towards the US and Japan as of late. Now, the meeting is significant, and it marks the first communication between top diplomats since the incident involving Ambassador Sing Haiming's remarks. Now, there is speculation that this meeting could lead to a meeting between the foreign ministers of both countries during the ASEAN Regional Forum and other ASEAN ministerial meetings. Now, during the latest meeting, the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, Choi Yong-sam, and the Chinese Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sun Weidong, discussed the measures taken by both governments to maintain and improve stable relations. They both agree that efforts should be made to enhance the relationship between the two countries based on mutual respect and mutual benefits. And they also recalled their belief in a previous statement that was made between the two countries that the relationship would contribute to the stability of the Korean Peninsula. And they also discussed strengthening communication and cooperation on the issue of North Korea's nuclear program, urged China to play a constructive role in stopping North Korean provocations and resuming denuclearization talks. Both sides exchanged views on the Taiwan issue as well, which has been kind of a key point of contention in Korea-China relations. Sun explained China's position on the One China policy, emphasizing that it is a matter of China's internal affairs and an important aspect of the bilateral relationship. Choi confirmed South Korea's consistent position of respecting the policy. They also agreed to promote trade, manage supply chains effectively, and expand people-to-people and cultural exchanges. Now, the meeting itself was described as a frank and productive communication. They also decided to continue enhancing political and diplomatic communication between the two countries as well. And Choi also had a separate meeting with Assistant Minister Norong of the Chinese Foreign Ministry to discuss trilateral cooperation between Korea, China, and Japan as well. So as these meetings go, cordial, but is there much progress? That remains to be seen.
And with that, we move on to our final keyword of the day.
Expo bid support.
Prime Minister Han Duck-soo is in the Caribbean to promote Busan's bid to host the World Expo in 2030. I am surprised to see, but we're running out of time apparently. What's the latest?
I'll certainly get over it briefly, summarizing it. Yes, the Caribbean is basically one of the largest or fiercest battlegrounds when it comes to voting for the World Expo, and if that's why the Prime Minister is making more efforts to gather support there during that CARICOM summit, which started on Monday in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, he's garnering support from the Caribbean nations. 13 out of the 14 Caribbean countries will actually vote at the BIE event in November. That's why, of course, it is significant to get support during his visit there. And actually, CARICOM actually helped during Korea's bid, or Yasu's bid, to host the Expo back in 2012. So that's why it's even more crucial. And that's why he's there. Han also unveiled a series of measures aimed at enhancing cooperation between Korea and the Caribbean nations as well. And he also held a meeting with the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, while there. And he's going to be heading to Panama for a 3-day visit and also stopping by the US city of Dallas to meet Koreans living there before returning home.
Thank you very much, Adam. And for our podcast listeners, my apologies for making Adam Raptors Muse verses. I'll speak less tomorrow. See you tomorrow.
No problem. You're very welcome. See you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.